Good morning. I'm Lindsay Reiser. Savannah and Joe are off this morning. Right now on Morning News Now, guilty. British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell convicted on 5 of 6 federal charges for conspiring with wealthy financier Jeffrey Epstein over several years to recruit, groom, and sexually abuse underage girls. The jury's verdict coming after 6 days of deliberations and a 3-week trial, which included emotional testimony from 4 of Epstein's accusers.
The road to justice has been far too long. But today, justice has been done.
Maxwell faces the possibility of spending the rest of her life in prison. We have details, reaction, and analysis, plus what's next in the case. Startling statistics, the fight against COVID taking a turn for the worse. New cases now at an all-time high and hospitals pushed to the brink with the highly contagious Omicron variant driving the surge. Now some experts are warning people to think twice about those New Year's celebrations. Our team is standing by with what you need to know. High-stakes call. President Biden and Russian President Putin set to talk today as fears grow over a full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. Details on the efforts to ease tensions and bring the conflict to an end. And smile because it happened. 2021 coming to an end much differently than many of us had hoped. And as difficult as this year has been, it wasn't all bad. We'll take a look back at some of the best moments of the year. We are going to begin in New York this morning and a verdict in the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell, convicted on federal sex trafficking charges. The jury found the British socialite and one-time confidant of wealthy financier Jeffrey Epstein guilty on 5 of 6 counts, concluding she played a pivotal role in recruiting and grooming teenage girls to be sexually abused by Epstein. In a statement after the verdict was announced, the prosecutor recognized the victims who came forward and the key role their testimony played in the trial.
I want to commend the bravery of the girls, now grown women, who stepped out of the shadows and into the courtroom. Their courage and willingness to face their abuser made today's result and this case possible.
NBC News correspondent for investigations Tom Winter has more.
Lindsay, good morning. At a federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan, a jury of 12 agreeing that Ghislaine Maxwell, the former British socialite, the millionaire, and the confidant of Jeffrey Epstein, was guilty on 5 of 6 counts, including sex trafficking, which carries a maximum penalty of up to 40 years. For the socialite who turned 60 on Christmas Day, it effectively could mean a life sentence. For Maxwell, this case was involving 4 victims who testified against her, the jury convicting on counts that involved the direct testimony of 2 of those victims, meaning that they believe their stories. And for these victims who have waited so long for justice in this case, they were finally able to get it. They came forward with stories about how they were approached, some as young as 14 years old, while they were eating ice cream at a summer band camp by Maxwell and Epstein, and eventually offered money in exchange for massages that would turn sexual. Not only was Maxwell charged in this case with trying to entice these women, with trying to recruit them for the purposes of sex, prosecutors said, but also that she was directly involved in the sexual abuse herself. They said in their closing arguments that Maxwell wasn't just Jeffrey Epstein's right-hand man, but in fact worked hand-in-hand with him. The defense made arguments that these women were motivated by money and payments that they received, that these women had faulty memories and memories that had been manipulated by their own attorneys over time, but jurors ultimately rejecting that argument. Next for Maxwell is a sentencing hearing at a date to be announced. She will remain in federal custody where she's been since her arrest in July of 2020 at a facility in Brooklyn. And we'll just have to see where this investigation may go from here and if any other individuals could ultimately be charged. Lindsay?
All right, Tom Winter, thank you. Let's go ahead and bring in NBC News analyst Barbara McQuaid. She's a professor at the University of Michigan Law School and a former U.S. attorney. Barbara, a very good morning to you. As we just heard from Tom, let's talk about that one charge Maxwell was not convicted of. So she was found not guilty of count 2, enticing a minor to travel to engage in illegal sexual acts. But as you can see, she was found guilty of conspiracy to entice. We know count 2 was only in reference to the accuser known as Jane. We also know that the jury asked for a definition of enticement earlier in the week. What went on here?
Well, what it says to me, Lindsay, is that the jury was really very careful in scrutinizing the charges and looking carefully at the evidence. We know that in their deliberations, they asked for a whiteboard, they asked for transcripts, and so they were clearly looking at this. As you mentioned, they actually asked for a definition of the word enticement. That related solely to this witness named Jane, who was describing her abuse. Her abuse occurred between 1994 and 1997, although the jury did find Maxwell guilty for transporting Jane. They found that she was not guilty of enticement of Jane. Jane was the one witness who did get cross-examined about some inconsistent statements she had made in the past about Maxwell's role. And so I think that this example shows me that this jury took their job very seriously. And so that when they find guilt beyond a reasonable doubt for the other 5 charges, that really means something.
Well, a sentencing date hasn't been set yet, but Maxwell does face up to 65 years in prison for those 5 guilty charges. And her defense attorney spoke to reporters after the verdict was read. Let's listen.
We firmly believe in Ghislaine's innocence. Obviously, we are very disappointed with the verdict. We have already started working on the appeal, and we are confident that she will be vindicated.
What does the appeal process look like?
Well, a defendant can wait until after their sentence before they file their appeal, and then they must file within 10 days. But they can look at any number of issues. It is almost every single time a defendant is convicted, they will file an appeal. And why not? There's nothing to lose. They will argue that there were legal errors made. Perhaps they will even argue that there were errors in the jury instructions. That is a fairly common place for defendants to look. They may argue that some of the evidence that was admitted was violated the rules of evidence, or they might even argue something that's called sufficiency of the evidence, that even though this jury found her guilty, it was insufficient for most rational triers of fact. So that's what they'll look for. They'll scour the transcripts for any errors. The prosecution will respond. They'll argue it before the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. That appeal will likely take a year or more before they file briefs, they hold oral argument, and a decision is rendered. But no reason to think that there's anything but a strong conviction here that will withstand those appeals.
Okay, good to know. Barbara, there's another story related to Epstein to keep our eye on, and that is next week when a U.S. district judge will hear arguments on whether to dismiss Virginia Giuffre's civil lawsuit against Prince Andrew. Giuffre accused him of sexual abuse when she was under the age of 18, and Prince Andrew denies these claims. He says he has no recollection of ever meeting her. What does a judge consider in a case like this, and could the Maxwell verdict have any impact?
Well, I think one of the things they want to look at is, it is separate from this case. It is quite possible that Maxwell is guilty and Epstein is guilty without implicating Prince Andrew. But what a judge will be looking for is whether there is any basis for the lawsuit to go forward. Have they alleged facts sufficient that a lawsuit could go forward, that a finder of fact could find that some statute has been violated, versus everything you may say is true, but somehow it still doesn't line up with the law such that there can be a legal claim there. As to whether Maxwell can make a difference, I think the answer is yes. People who are convicted of crimes often suddenly see new incentives to cooperate with prosecutors and provide information that can be shared with litigators in a civil case. And so it could very well be that she cooperates and provides information that could implicate him.
All right, Barbara McQuaid, good to talk to you. Thank you so much. Turning now to the surge of COVID cases in the U.S., health officials are warning we could be in for another long winter as case records are shattered in several states. The World Health Organization is now warning that both the Omicron and Delta variants could completely overwhelm healthcare systems across the world, even though Omicron seems to result in less severe symptoms. Let's listen.
I'm highly concerned that Omicron, being more transmissible, circulating at the same time as Delta, is leading to a tsunami of cases.
And at the same time, the demand for COVID tests is rapidly outpacing the supply of tests available, making it hard to paint the full picture of the impact these variants are having. Let's bring in NBC News correspondent Antonia Hilton in Greenwich, Connecticut this morning, and NBC News correspondent Gary Grumbach in Washington, D.C. So, Gary, where you are, health officials are trying to get test kits to people who live in the district. It's a city with one of the highest rates of infection. But officials believe there's actually an undercount of positive cases. So why is that? And what are they saying people should do if they test positive using an at-home test?
Yeah, good morning, Lindsay. We have seen just a mad dash for those rapid tests all across the country, whether you're trying to get one at a pharmacy, your local grocery store, department store. Here in D.C., they are actually handing out 2 free rapid test kits to D.C. residents every single day at 8 libraries across the city. But if you get one, if you're lucky enough to get one, and if you do end up testing positive, who do you tell? Well, that in many states and cities around this country, they don't have these self-reporting systems to be able to call up or go online and tell somebody that you did, in fact, test positive for COVID. Usually it's just through those PCR testings at these public testing sites like the one that's setting up behind me for the day. And so because of that, D.C. officials are saying 108,000 people have gotten those rapid tests. That's a good thing. It's always good to know whether or not you're positive. But just 17,000 people have reported back results. And they say even if you're negative, they want to know the results because it helps them paint a bigger picture of where the positivities are and where the negativities are across the city. Lindsay?
Antonia, you're in Connecticut, where Governor Ned Lamont announced a new at-home testing kit initiative. It was supposed to begin today. Now that's been delayed. So what happened and what can we expect to see from that program once it does get started?
That's right, Lindsay. He announced this ambitious initiative to pass out 3 million at-home testing kits and 6 million N95 masks to communities across the state. And what was supposed to happen today was that municipalities would send leaders out to certain distribution sites and they could pick up these supplies, bring them back to their cities or towns and start doing drives and giving them out for free at events throughout the day today and tomorrow ahead of New Year's celebrations this weekend. And now, because of supply chain issues and shipping issues, those supplies just simply haven't arrived here in Connecticut yet. So Ned Lamont sent out a press release last night letting people throughout the state know that the supplies weren't here and that they're hoping that this rollout is going to get started tomorrow. But I spoke to an official very early this morning who said that in the Stamford area, they still don't know when the flight that has their supplies is actually going to take off. So right now, the situation remains very fluid. And I think it really just goes to show that at this point, as we enter now close into our 3rd year of the pandemic, just how challenging our testing infrastructure continues to be and how difficult it is for state and local level leadership to plan as we're in this really critical period of the pandemic, Lindsay.
Certainly. I mean, Gary, back to Washington, officials announced a new $15 million grant to try and help with hospital staffing. So what's happening inside these hospitals and how will this grant help?
Yeah, I think when you're looking at who's testing positive across the country, you got to see what they do. Many of them I've talked to over the past 2 weeks, they're mailmen, they're hospitality workers, and many of them are in emergency services. Many of them work in hospitals. In D.C. today, 25% of all employees at hospitals across the city are not working because they have COVID-19. And that's a real problem. What D.C. is doing to supplement is bringing in traveling nursing teams. But they're expensive. They cost anywhere from $160 to $200 an hour per nurse. And so to supplement that, D.C. has announced a $15 million grant program for these hospitals to be able to bring money in to these places. There is some good news in all of this. Who is in the hospital and how many people are in the hospital has stayed steady in D.C. Take a listen to what they said yesterday at a briefing.
What you'll notice here is the demographics of these patients are the same. We're seeing the same trends. The graphs are slightly different in numbers, but we're seeing the same ages of individuals that are hospitalized here in D.C. And that's good news for us. We're not seeing significant changes in the types of patients that were hospitalized. And we're not seeing substantial amounts, again, that 2.6% of patients that are hospitalized.
Now, as we've seen throughout the pandemic, the vast majority of those hospitalized are unvaccinated. Lindsay?
Antonia, I got to be quick here. Are healthcare workers seeing any kind of post-holiday surge in Connecticut yet?
Absolutely. Doctors here locally already are seeing it. This is coming out of Thanksgiving, of course, Christmas. And to paint a picture for you, on Tuesday, the positivity rate was at about 15% here. And just yesterday, it was just under 18%. So they're already seeing the surge, and they're only expecting things to get more challenging as people head to events or dinners around New Year's this weekend. Lindsay.
All right, Antonia Hilton and Gary Grumbach, our thanks to both of you. Well, many cities are now scaling back their New Year's Eve celebrations due to rising cases and Omicron. That includes New York City, which will hold a much smaller event in Times Square this year compared to years past. NBC News correspondent Jacob Soboroff has the latest.
Times Square placing the finishing touches on its New Year's celebrations.
Happy New Year! Yeah!
And even if the Welcome to 2022 party will be scaled back, tourists are still excited for the experience.
We made the plans when things seemed like they were slowing down, and so we kind of just kept it and took our precautions.
The famous ball's in place, and Wednesday saw a rehearsal for confetti. These few handfuls, a small preview of the 3,000 pounds of it that'll rain down on 15,000 fully vaccinated and masked attendees, roughly a quarter of the crowd that normally gathers here. Chicago also moving ahead with their festivities, but choosing to spread out its fireworks along the river to alleviate crowding.
There was a conscious decision made, not only obviously that it's outdoors, but to spread it out so we don't have massive crowds gathering in one place.
Some other major cities are scrapping their celebrations. Atlanta, Los Angeles, and San Francisco canceled their large-scale events, and up the coast in Seattle, the Space Needle fireworks will explode over empty streets, as crowds won't be allowed to gather near the landmark to watch. The celebrations across the globe will look a little different. While Sydney, Australia plans to keep up its tradition of the first major fireworks in the world, we won't be seeing them light up the skies above Paris, London, Berlin, Athens, or Rome. Much of Europe trying to avoid mass gatherings. Looking to celebrate on a smaller scale, experts urging caution amidst record COVID numbers.
When you're dealing with a family gathering in a home where you and the people that are there are vaccinated and boosted, although nothing is 100% risk-free, that's a relatively risk-free situation. The New Year's Eve celebration where you have 30 or 40 people and you don't know the vaccine status of many of the people, that's something you really want to stay away from.
So if you're around strangers, maybe save that midnight kiss for ringing in 2023. Hopefully.
All right, Jacob Soboroff, thanks for that. Let's go ahead and bring in Dr. Anand Swaminathan for more on this. He's an assistant professor of emergency medicine at St. Joseph's Regional Medical Center. So, Doctor, good to see you here. To try and clarify some of the confusion that's been out there, Dr. Anthony Fauci talked to MSNBC's Ayman Mohyeldin last night about why the change to isolation guidelines was made this week. Let's listen.
So they were trying to strike a balance. How do we do good public health principles at the time we don't have to get to the point where you're forced to essentially shut the country down? Most of the risk is segregated in those first 5 days. And so the risk is very, very low of transmitting as you get into days 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10.
So knowing that we could see not only a post-Christmas surge, but a post-New Year's surge, how do people balance risk when they're deciding what to do on New Year's?
I think balancing that risk has been the hard thing throughout. And I think right now, with the way cases are surging, the best way to balance that risk, the best way to take the least risk you can is to have a small, intimate gathering. Everybody vaccinated, everyone boosted that's eligible, and even better is if you can do rapid tests before gathering, just as we were recommending for Christmas and Thanksgiving. Obviously, those rapid tests are very hard to come by, but that is the best way to gather safely indoors. But having large parties where you don't know if everyone's vaccinated, that's a real nightmare. And even these outdoor events, 15,000 people outdoors, that still has a considerable amount of risk associated with it. So we want to keep that risk as low as we can. If you're doing an indoor gathering, small group, all vaccinated, all boosted if possible.
Well, and just ahead of New Year's celebrations, New York City is reporting 30% of the FDNY's EMS force is out sick. So what does this mean for people who need help for COVID, who need other medical emergencies? And we know hospital staff like yourself, they're doing their best, but are you seeing changes to emergency services right now because of Omicron?
We're absolutely seeing it. 30% down is a huge number for a very large population. And that means that people aren't going to be able to get to the hospital when they need to. There are going to be delays in getting to the hospital. And all of those are problems because, Lindsay, what we're seeing is not just a rise in COVID cases coming to the emergency department, but we're seeing all of the other stuff that we always see. And those cases are going to be delayed in reaching care, which is hugely problematic. And then even when they get to us, we're also down 25 to 30% of our staff, which means there's going to be longer delays in getting medical care. These are all the problems. And this is even more reason to start to see some real restrictions start to take place to reduce the number of cases. We need to try to flatten out the huge rise in cases that are coming. And while we're talking about these 30% decreases in staff, we're not talking about those restrictions that we should be seeing about restaurants, about outdoor and indoor gatherings. All of these things need to be taken place together in order to stop that rise.
Finally, Doctor, we're getting some new information about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine from South Africa. We want to add the study hasn't been peer-reviewed, but it suggests that 2 doses of the vaccine helped reduce Omicron hospitalizations in the country by up to 85%. What does this tell you about the Omicron variant and what we know about all of the various vaccines' effectiveness against it?
Well, like you said, we haven't seen the data yet, and we do need to see that data. But if it holds up, this is really good news. The J&J vaccine hasn't been a huge part of our vaccination in the United States, but it's been a massive part of vaccination in other places, and it will continue to be a massive part of vaccination efforts around the globe. Without global vaccination efforts, we can never really stop this pandemic or at least get it under control. And so it's good news to see that 2 doses of J&J will dramatically protect against hospitalizations. That's really good news. We do want to see that data, but it's just another indication that we have different options so we can really reach out and get the globe vaccinated.
All right, Dr. Anand Swaminathan, good to see you. Thanks so much. The hectic holiday travel rush has been thrown into disarray from the Omicron variant, as well as some severe weather across the country. One bright spot, finally, flight cancellations are going down, but thousands of passengers are still stranded this morning. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson has the latest from LAX.
I just want to get home. Although cancellations have eased somewhat, the misery index at airports is still sky high. Delta canceling 250 flights and announcing vouchers for wayward travelers. United scratching more than 150 flights, while Alaska Airlines and JetBlue proactively thinning their flight schedules. The rash of cancellations, a continuation of the holiday chaos caused by surging Omicron numbers and severe weather.
Not being with my parents for New Year's Eve. Don't make me cry.
The highest pain points felt at airports like Seattle, where unclaimed bags are piling up. And with nearly 2 million people still flying daily, travel expert Scott Keyes says airport headaches aren't likely to ease anytime soon.
We can expect this to continue through the holiday season, through the new year, and it probably will not let up until the actual travel rush lets up.
Flights not the only travel disrupted. The cruise ship industry suffering too. Nearly 90 ships now under some kind of CDC monitoring for COVID outbreaks. Howard Benjamin and his wife stuck at sea after the Queen Mary II confirmed it won't return to New York after a rash of COVID cases.
We don't know how we're getting home yet.
This is winter weather wreaks havoc across the country. Icy roads causing this 4-mile backup in Wisconsin. 20 million Americans are under severe weather alerts, while the Southeast braces for severe weather, including possible tornadoes like the one that ripped the roof off the Civic Center in Alabama overnight.
And if you are flying anywhere anytime soon, experts recommend that you come prepared. Have a backup plan. Know the customer service number of the carrier that you're flying. And remember that if you do have a cancellation, it is federal law that you're owed a full cash refund. Important to keep in mind, Lindsay.
All right. Hopefully all those people behind you have some smooth sails today. Thanks, Steve. Let's go ahead and get a check now at your morning news now weather. Michelle Grossman joins us now. Michelle, good morning.
Good morning, Lindsay. Great to see you. And we have a lot of weather going on. We have winter weather, we have spring-like weather, and we have those severe storms that Steve touched upon just a few minutes ago. So as we look at this weather, this is from Alabama. The roof ripped off. We had a ton of wind reports. This happened all overnight. It started yesterday evening, extended into the night, into the early morning hours. We had a tornado watch that expired about 6 o'clock this morning. And we also had 3 reported tornadoes. So we'll have to watch that over the next several days to see if they were in fact tornadoes. But those storms continue today, and we do have a risk of seeing some strong storms, not quite as volatile as last night or this morning. That sort of ramps up again tomorrow. But this is what it looks like on radar. You can see some light rain through the mid-Atlantic, the Northeast, but it's really the Southeast where we're seeing those lightning strikes and also those thunderstorms. So we'll be watching that as we go throughout today. A marginal risk, that's sort of 1 out of 5 on the scale from the Storm Prediction Center today. And one piece of this puzzle that's fueling these storms is the warmth. So we're seeing spring-like weather, 80s in Baton Rouge. I would even call that summer-like weather. 68 in Nashville, that's 19 degrees above what is typical for this time of year. and 83 in Jacksonville. Now, as we head towards tomorrow, that warmth expands even further north. So Pittsburgh, 57 on Friday. That's New Year's Eve, 17 degrees above normal for this time of year. We still do have winter weather out there, though. Tons of winter alerts to the west, where we could see 1 to 2 feet on the highest mountains. And these alerts continue through Friday. Again, where you see the pink, that's your highest amount. Also, Lindsay, we're looking at some rain, too, in Los Angeles County. We could see some flash flooding there. We're seeing just plumes of moisture moving on shore, but that should improve later on today. Back to you.
All right, Michelle, sounds good. Happy New Year. Appreciate it. Coming up, President Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin set to speak today about tensions between Russia and Ukraine. What each side wants as fears of an invasion grow. Stay with us. You're watching Morning News Now. President Biden will hold a call today with Russian President Vladimir Putin about the escalating tensions over Ukraine. 100,000 Russian troops are staged along the Ukrainian border, prompting fears of an imminent invasion. This will be the second call in 3 weeks between the two leaders and sets the stage for more extensive security talks between the nations next month. Joining us right now, NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli and Chief Foreign Correspondent Richard Engel. Good morning to both of you. And Richard, I want to start with you here. We understand Russia requested this call. So do we have any sense of why Putin wants to talk earlier and what his priorities are?
Well, I think we have a good sense now from the Kremlin. Both a White House official briefed American reporters, and now Dmitry Peskov, Putin's longtime spokesman, has briefed reporters in Russia. And he laid out what Russia's expectation is for this call. He said this would set the groundwork for more diplomatic talks that are supposed to take place on the 10th, 12th, and 13th. All of those discussions are primarily focused on Ukraine, and those were supposed to take place at a lower level. They were supposed to take place mostly at a foreign ministry to State Department level. But according to Peskov, Putin himself wants to be engaged. Putin doesn't want this process to get ahead of him. He wants to speak to President Biden directly and to clarify a few points. He didn't say exactly what those points would be, and set the tone and the agenda for the talks that will take place in mid-January between the relative State Departments and foreign ministries. That's what the description was from the Kremlin. The White House has also briefed and said that they want to de-escalate. They are looking for an off-road, and they don't want to see Russia take further aggressive action toward Ukraine. Russia already occupies a piece of Ukraine, and they would like to see Russia pull its troops back and stop threatening Ukraine, or the U.S. and NATO allies have threatened to unleash what they describe as unprecedented sanctions against the Russian economy. So what we're seeing now is really Putin saying he needs one more talk with Biden before the diplomatic efforts can go forward. He really believes that he alone is the decision maker in this process, and he wants to talk to the American president before unleashing this to the diplomats.
Mike, that said, what are the red lines for the U.S. in terms of what Russia is asking for?
Yeah, Lindsay. Well, it's been crystal clear, as Richard lays out, that President Putin is trying to get the attention of the U.S. throughout this process and only wants to deal with the U.S. throughout this process. But President Biden has made it clear that he's doing everything he can to keep an international coalition, primarily our Western allies, together in trying to deter President Putin and further escalation of this crisis. And we've seen over the last few days President Biden and some of the top administration officials engaging with our European allies, and there's several reasons for that. One is there's this principle the president has laid out that there will be no discussions with Russia about Ukraine without Ukraine being part of those discussions. Secondly, the economic leverage that President Biden has threatened, the severe economic sanctions, depend on keeping our allies unified behind them. And third, so much of what Putin is demanding depends on decisions made by not just the United States, but by the broader NATO alliance. The big red line for President Putin has been he wants this clear commitment from NATO that they will not admit Ukraine as a member state. That's an obvious red line for the United States that they're not willing to even engage in. Putin also wants the commitment that there will not be further defensive weapons being shared with Ukraine, further troop coalition movements in some of the NATO member states that border Russia and Ukraine. Those are also things that the U.S. said they're willing to discuss with Putin, but they're not necessarily willing to budge on.
Richard, any sign at this point from Russia of de-escalation?
There was one report, one move, but it's not clear how significant it was. It happened right around Christmas. As you mentioned, Russia has about 100,000 troops around the border. These troops move. It's not like they're all lined up all along the border with rifles out and bayonets fixed. They do move around, and there were about 10,000 of those troops that appeared to pull back, and a Russian state media report said that they had been pulled back to their permanent bases. But they could be deployed again, and a U.S. official said just yesterday that Russia still maintains a sizable force. So that move, unclear how significant it was, but it may have been a peace gesture. It could have been an offering ahead of these discussions, this discussion that we're seeing later today. It takes place around midnight Moscow time. Peskov, Putin's spokesman, was asked about that, if he thought it was an insult or it bothered him that this is taking place around midnight in Moscow. He said that the time difference is what it is and that the Russian president works around the clock anyway, so it wouldn't be a problem. But what we're seeing is that this they do appear to want to talk. Russia said that it is in the mood to negotiate. Whether that means they're in the mood to de-escalate, however, I think we'll only see as the events unfold.
Fair point. Richard Engel, Mike Memley, thank you both so much. Let's go ahead and take a look at what else is making news around the world this morning. Raf Sanchez joins us now from Tel Aviv. Raf, good morning.
Lindsay, good morning. Crews in Sudan are working to recover dozens of bodies after a gold mine collapse. Officials say 36 people were inside the mine when it crumbled on Sunday. Only one person survived. Gold is one of Sudan's most valuable exports, and companies sometimes turn to risky practices to extract it. In Argentina, firefighters are battling massive flames across the south of the country. The firefighters are struggling in the face of strong winds, which are pushing the blaze towards inhabited areas. Authorities have been forced to close major roads as more than 100 firefighters and 3 aircrafts try to get control. And finally, a whole new meaning to Christmas leftovers. Animals at a German zoo have been snacking on unsold Christmas trees. Elephants, bison, and even reindeer got in on the festive feast. The director of the Berlin Zoo says the fir trees are like candy for animals. But, Lindsay, you got to think those pine needles would get stuck in their teeth, right?
I think the pine needles in my house, Raf, are way too dry to be considered candy. Raf, thanks so much. From decisions on abortion rights to gun rights, the Supreme Court will have a busy year ahead. Coming up, we'll look at the high-stakes decisions we can expect in 2022. Wondered why you or someone you know prefers black coffee over other brews? According to a new study from Northwestern, it has to do with our genetic makeup. Scientists discovered coffee drinkers who have a specific genetic variant that breaks down caffeine quicker prefer bitter black coffee. The people with this gene associate the bitter flavor with the boost in mental alertness that they expect from caffeine. And scientists found that people with this genetic variation also prefer dark chocolate because of that same bitter taste. All right, turns out those people are in luck. Black coffee has been found to lower the risk of certain conditions such as Parkinson's and cardiovascular diseases. The U.S. Supreme Court returns after the holidays with a momentous decision on the Texas abortion law expected before the term ends. NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams takes a look at that and what else to expect in the new year.
Abortion began dominating this Supreme Court term even before it officially started. In early September, the justices allowed Texas to continue enforcing SB 8 while a battle over its constitutionality raged on. The law bans most abortions after 6 weeks of pregnancy and allows anybody anywhere to sue anyone who violates it. A bitterly divided Supreme Court ended up ruling that abortion providers can continue fighting the law in court, but made it nearly impossible for a successful court challenge to shut the law down.
The Supreme Court said we can't sue judges, we can't sue clerks, we can't sue the Attorney General. We can't get the lawsuits blocked, and the lawsuits are what are making it impossible for the clinics to open, because this law allows anybody to sue anywhere in the world against the clinics in Texas.
A ruling in an even more consequential case is coming by late June on Mississippi's law that would ban abortion after 15 weeks. A victory for Mississippi would undercut nearly 5 decades of rulings, starting with Roe v. Wade, that say states cannot ban abortion before a fetus is viable at around 24 weeks. When that case was argued, a majority of the court seemed willing to uphold the law and undercut Roe, if not overturn it. The court's liberals warned that such an outcome would seem like a decision based on politics.
Will this institution survive the stench that this creates in the public perception that the Constitution and its reading are just political acts?
The court will also decide the fate of a New York law that bans carrying a handgun in public. Residents can get a permit to carry a concealed weapon, but only if they can show some special need beyond a general desire for self-defense. Gun rights advocates say that violates the constitutional right to keep and bear arms.
It's contrary to the Second Amendment. I mean, does your right to self-protection stop when you leave your home?
A majority on the Supreme Court seemed to agree that the New York law is unconstitutional. Such a decision would be a boost to Second Amendment rights. The court this term will also decide whether to loosen restrictions on using public money to pay for religious education, whether Boston Marathon bomber Johar Tsarnaev is entitled to a new sentencing hearing, and whether to take up a challenge to affirmative action in college admissions. The term is unfolding as President Biden's commission on the Supreme Court ended its work with no recommendations. It was divided on adding more justices to the current 9-member court, though more receptive to the idea of term limits. And we may learn whether Justice Stephen Breyer intends to retire at the end of the current term, while Democrats still control the White House and the Senate. He's now the court's senior liberal. Justice Breyer will turn 84 in August and says the timing of his retirement will depend on his health. Pete Williams, NBC News at the Supreme Court.
Coming up, the new year comes with a new minimum wage for many states. We're going to tell you who's getting a pay boost. But first, a rare tiger was killed last night after attacking a worker who reached inside its enclosure. We'll have that story out of Florida right after the break. A rare tiger was shot and killed by a Florida police officer after it attacked a worker who had reached inside its enclosure at a zoo. That worker now has serious injuries. NBC News correspondent Carrie Sanders now has the latest from Fort Lauderdale. Carrie, good morning.
Well, good morning, Lindsay. This terrifying attack happened after hours at the Naples Zoo. The authorities believe the maintenance worker was in an area where he should not have gone and then reached into the tiger enclosure to either feed it or pet it. And that's when the tiger latched on and would not let go.
A terrifying tiger attack inside a Florida zoo, leaving one person hospitalized in intensive care.
Medical emergency. Naples Zoo.
It happened late Wednesday evening after the Naples Zoo had already closed to the public. Authorities say an outside maintenance worker who was supposed to be cleaning restrooms and the gift shop instead crossed a fence barrier and entered the tiger enclosure. Investigators say he reached through a second fence, possibly to pet or feed the adult tiger, when the nearly 300-pound cat latched onto his arm. Sheriff's deputies quickly rushed to the scene, the first officer kicking the enclosure in an effort to scare the animal. When that didn't work, authorities say the deputy was forced to shoot the tiger, which caused it to retreat.
Yeah, the tiger is still inside the tiger cage.
The zoo releasing a statement overnight calling the employee a third-party contractor with no authorization to be inside animal enclosures. The zoo also confirming as a result of the incident, the rare 8-year-old Malayan tiger named Echo died. A
attacks like this are extremely rare, and it's really important to note that the authorities say had this maintenance worker not gone to an area where he did not belong and crossed through the multiple layers of security, this would not have happened, and Echo would likely still be alive. Lindsay?
All right, Carrie, thanks so much. Thousands of people will ring in the new year with a bigger paycheck. That's because the minimum wage is set to go up in 21 states. Here's a map that shows where. It's all happening January 1st. This includes Arizona, Montana, Missouri, New Jersey, New York, California. Here to help us break down all of this impact is Sadeh Gabriselassie. So, Sadeh, thank you for being with us. You're the director of the work quality for the National Employment Law Project. Talk about the impact that this wage hike will have for workers.
It's going to have a tremendous impact, and it's the result of over a decade of organizing by underpaid workers. Even as the federal minimum wage has been stuck at $7.25 an hour for the past 13 years, we've seen tremendous momentum in states and also cities that have taken it upon themselves to raise the minimum wage, often to $15 an hour or more. A lot of these increases are pegged to rise with increases in cost of living, which, as we know now, is especially important. But a lot remains to be done. I mean, I think millions of workers are going to benefit, but there are so many workers that are still stuck at $7.25 an hour, so many workers that are dealing with, really hard workplace conditions. But this is a great start.
And that $7.25 an hour is the federal minimum wage. It's been at that rate since 2009. It's never been stuck at that level so long before. Why hasn't that been raised?
Well, Congress needs to act. It has been, like you said, this 13-year stretch is the longest that the minimum wage has been stuck at one level. For tip workers, workers in restaurants, the tip minimum wage is $2.13 an hour on the federal level, and it's been stuck at that level for 30 years. So clearly there's so much catch up that has to be done on the federal level. In the meantime, at least workers in, states and cities that have gone higher are able to get some relief from that.
Who pays for minimum wage increases? Because right now, obviously, we're at a time of record inflation. So will the costs for employers to pay their workers more be passed on to consumers?
No, I mean, there have been decades upon decades of research, both, economic research, but also real world experience that shows that when you raise wages, and these wages have gone up really incrementally over the last few years, it's not like minimum wage goes from $7.25 to $15 overnight. They're gradual increases. Employers benefit from reduced turnover. If there is a cost increase, it's very minimal. And a lot of this, like I said, is just playing catch up. The reason why we need to raise wages, why we need to raise them further, isn't just because of inflation. It's also because wages have been stuck at the same level for so long.
All right. Sadeh Gabriselassie, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
It is time for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you. Christina Partsinevelos joins us now. Good morning, Christina.
Good morning. Let's start with Vanguard. Their website has been suffering a partial outage for the past week, preventing customers from accessing certain statements. The mutual fund giant says it's working to minimize the disruption, which was caused by a service interruption involving a third-party vendor. But Vanguard says some customers may experience some delayed mailings or be unable to access statements, confirmations, or forms online. Fortnite is back after the servers for the popular online game went down for about 7 hours yesterday. Epic Games, which publishes Fortnite, says the problem was resolved shortly before 7 p.m. Eastern. The glitch also affected Epic's App Store, which is currently in the middle of a holiday sale, and blocks some players from downloading and launching games in their own library. Epic suggests compensation may be in the works for users, fingers crossed. And last but not least, DoorDash is making all employees, even its CEO, deliver orders under its We Dash program. Employees, including those in the corporate office, must serve as delivery drivers. If they can't, they can choose other experiences such as shadowing workers in customer service. DoorDash says the program lets everyone learn how its technology and service works firsthand. But not everyone is happy. One employee who says they make $400,000 a year vented on an anonymous social media site called Blind about having to take part. Back to you guys.
Sounds like undercover boss to me. Christina, thanks
Yes,
so much.
exactly.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, every year has highs and lows. This one, maybe a few more than others. But there were still some bright spots. Coming up, we've got Rolling Stone's list of 2021's top happy moments. We'll get to those when we come back. 2021 was a long and challenging year, but it was filled with moments of joy. So as we prepare to ring in 2022, we'd like to look back at some of the happier moments from this year. Lucky for us, Rolling Stone chronicled the top 10 moments that made us smile, from Amanda Gorman's inauguration poem in January to a milestone in America's vaccination rates. And of course, who could forget when 82-year-old Wally Funk finally got to go to space? Joining us now for the rest of these highlights is Rolling Stone culture editor Elizabeth Garber-Paul, who helped curate the list. So Elizabeth, this has got to be one of the better assignments, right? But before we get into the highlights, how did you guys put this list together?
So this list started last year. We had obviously gone through a very difficult year, and it was more of just an exercise to look back and remember that it wasn't all bad. 2021 turned out to be a little bit harder, actually, putting together this list. I think 2020, we didn't quite know what we were in for, and we still had a lot of hope. And by mid-2021, I think a lot of us felt very beaten down by everything that was going on. But again, this year, it felt like a good exercise to go back and look at the bright spots that had come out of 2021, because it hadn't all been bad.
Well, one of the items on the list was the anti-work group on Reddit. So we obviously know about the Great Resignation. Tell us about this group and how it ended up on your list.
So this group ended up on our list because it had been a feature that our news editor, Brenna Ehrlich, put together in October. One thing I did notice putting together this list was that around May, a lot of the things that were coming out were really uplifting. These bands that were coming out, some great music was coming out, and we were really excited. The half the U.S. is getting the jab at that point.
Yeah.
And then by about October, the items that were making us smile were a little bit darker. And, this anti-work Reddit was one of those items. It was just a subreddit where people were going to talk about really exploitative and inappropriate requests coming from their boss, largely service workers, and people who had really bared the brunt of the pandemic. So I think what really stuck out to folks and what made it a moment that made us smile was these people standing up and not taking it anymore, and valuing their own personal time and their own lives over giving their all to a job that wasn't giving back to them.
Well, out of everything that you guys talked about, what on the list made you smile the most?
So there were a couple. The Linda Linda's song really stuck out to me as a child of the 90s who had a Bikini Kill shirt and a punk band. I just loved watching this video. I mean, the Linda Lindas they didn't come out of nowhere. They had actually opened for Bikini Kill at the Hollywood Palladium in 2019. They had appeared in Amy Poehler's movie Moxie. But this video really struck a chord. I think it got millions of views, and it ended up landing them a record deal with Epitaph. But just watching these 4 young women rock out at the LA Library was great.
All right, we got a couple seconds. You said there were a couple of your favorites. Real quick, what was the next one?
Amanda Gorman at Biden's inauguration. Just such an inspirational moment, and coming out of 4 years of darkness, it was really nice to watch someone just so young, with so much poise, so much grace, so much dignity, standing up there and speaking to America. It was really moving.
And she just released a brand new poem, New Days lyric as well. Elizabeth, thanks so much. Hopefully in 2022, you might have a slight easier time curating this list. I think we all hope for that. Thanks for your time.
Everyone.
Yeah. Happy New Year.
So much. Happy New Year. Bye-bye.
All right, everybody, that does it for this hour of Morning News Now. I'm Lindsay Reiser. The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.